Gave you too much, now I'm swallowed. Now I'm the fool while you're breaking rules. Dangerous path that I follow. Oh, go on, just do what you do. And it
Okay, hi, it's Juho Websalainen from React Finland. And this time we will discuss about lessons learned. And I have a couple of speakers here. So maybe you can tell your name and a couple of things about yourself. So, sorry. So.
Yeah, okay, I can just start. I'm like substitute speaker because the speaker we had before had to cancel. I'm actually one of the organizers, but I was kind of recruited so we have 3 speakers, not 2. So yeah, I'm Mikhail Novikov.
Okay, sure. So so what happened, with this pandemic? One of the speakers had to back out, so Mikhail came to substitute, and he's going to speak about burning out later. So we will have actually a very personal topic. So it's not a very technical topic, but it's an important topic. And then maybe Diego can tell a couple of words about himself and what you're doing these days.
Okay. Well, hello. My name is Diego Haas. And well, I work for Automatic as a JavaScript engineer. I'm Brazilian. I live in Brazil. Well, Brazil is one of the worst countries dealing with the pandemic. So, but yeah, I think I've been practicing social distancing pretty much my whole life. So I haven't needed to change my lifestyle too much. Yeah, and besides that, well, I've been programming for 18 years. So since I was a teenager, and both on front end and back end, but much more front end. And I also have background in design. Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, you made an interesting point that not much changed with pandemic, and I guess it's the same for me because I work remote, and I mean, I had one local client, and then and it was that kind of client that you could never have otherwise. They expected you to go to their office, and the first thing that happened when the pandemic really started, they wanted to go remote. So, I mean, if there's one good thing that came out of pandemic is that I got the remote client out of client I never expected to go remote. So, okay, and then we have Luke. Maybe you can tell a couple of words about yourself.
Yeah, hello everybody. My name is Luke. I'm a software engineer living in London. Currently working for Formidable, who are based in Seattle. And we have a London office over here, which we used to go to, but now we don't anymore. We probably won't for the foreseeable future. I'm quite enjoying the flexibility of remote working, pretty much like the rest of you sound like you are. Yeah. I sit weirdly in between design and development. I did a sort of undergrad in computer science and then master's in design, and since then I've sort of straddled that weird bridge. And that's what I'll be talking about today, I think, is something that sort of joins those two things.
Yeah, I think it's a good spot to be, I mean, between design and development, because then you can get actually a lot of interesting things done, as we will see later. So now that we are all experiencing the pandemic, did you learn something during this period of time this year, or like pick up some skills or notice something? I mean, what was there like specific thing you learned or picked up?
Mine was very specific. I actually learned to solve the 5x5 Rubik's Cube.
Yeah, that's cool.
Didn't do that before. I was just on 3x3s, but given that we now spend a lot of time, I thought it was about time we learned that.
Yeah. But Diego, did you pick up some skills or?
I'm spending more time with my 7-year-old son now that schools are closed, and he's at home all the time. So we've been playing some video games. So I think I've developed some pretty good Mario Kart skills. But related to programming, I've been researching and experimenting a lot with front end and React performance in general.
Yeah, and Mikhail, did you learn something specific or?
Sure. I mean, like as all of you, I've been working remote for a while, so COVID kind of like quite privileged in the sense that COVID didn't affect me, and Finland also was spared of big share of lockdowns that other people suffered in other kind of had to go through in other places. So we were able to, like, for example, go outside freely. So what I learned that I like hiking, and we've hiked a lot in Finland because, well, there's no travel anymore, and surprisingly that's super enjoyable, and yeah, I guess that's what I learned. Yeah,
so for me, and I guess for React Finland, is that one of the things we had to learn was how to do this online events. I think we're still learning how to do this, and we're lucky to have a good producer to help us. But it's one of the things we would have likely never done without the pandemic, because a live conference by definition, as it has been a tricky transformation, because you cannot move everything from a live conference online. So we're still kind of figuring out how to do things, but I hope it's getting better over time.
And the competition is pretty tough in online conferences. It's there's no locality like with React Finland. React Finland, we attract all the people in Finland, but with this online events, it's more like everyone, and then we're competing with everyone.
Yeah, I think one of the learnings for us has been that enough to take like traditional presentations and put them online, like you will do in a meetup. I mean, if you have a meetup, then it's fine to have traditional presentations, but I feel that it makes more sense to have more conversational content or like discussion based and try to introduce interaction that you could never do in real world. But and today's session is going to be interesting because I mean we have one, let's say, normal presentation by Diego, and then we have two sessions that are based more on discussion. So, I mean that's the thing. Like, what should you do in an online event? Do you actually have any specific good experiences about online or online events?
This is actually my first online event. I was very bad at going, you know, I think you said it before, it's very hard to get everyone in one place, especially a digital place.
Yeah.
You know, it's not as present. It's when you say you're going to a real life meetup, you sort of make plans, you know, after work I'm going to go here and there will be food and drink and lots of people to talk to, but there's not so much of a draw to online events in that sense.
Yeah, I guess the tricky part is that you spend one day coding and maybe have a lot of Zoom meetings, and then you ask people to do the same again after work. So it's sort of a lot to ask in a way.
True.
Yeah, so I think a lot happened in the world of JavaScript during the past week or two. So we got a lot of new releases. So there's JS, React. Is there anything specific that's interesting for you at the moment?
I guess this new framework by Ryan Florence and Michael Jackson, or like
the remix.
The pricing of it, I guess.
Yeah, that's the thing, because we're sort of a lot of us use open source. A lot of us are not used to paying for software we use, so it's always hard to sell something to software developers. So it's going to be interesting to see how it works out. Yeah, but
yeah, I've never used Next.js, any serious project, but like only played a little bit with it. But I think all the features they have released this year are really cool. Like their hybrid server rendered and static site generation approach, and there's also that static regeneration or something like that. And yesterday they announced the image optimization, internationalization support, which I think is only the routing part.
Yeah, it's only routing. I actually spent this morning with the client evaluating Next.js for their project, and it looks like it's a really good fit for their purposes, especially with the recent additions, because you start getting a lot of things out of the box, and it looks like it's going to be like sort of platform for other companies to pitch their products, like with the e-commerce. Yeah. So I think it's going to a good direction, and you can really develop things fast with it. So
yeah, I'm very excited to try all those things out.
Yeah. How about Luke? I noticed that you do a lot of this, let's say, bundlerless JavaScript, or like doing a lot of things in the browser. So do you have any specific thoughts on that?
Not within the last few weeks, I guess. Not that I've seen. I'm still like weirdly endlessly impressed by ES build, which is a build step, which kind of goes against the whole no build mantra, but I've been using it for like at the very last minute at deploy time to just whip over some code and put it into one file. Like a lot of the stuff I make by nature is quite small anyway, but the waterfall, the sort of ES module waterfall that you find is real, and ES build sort of sidesteps that in milliseconds now.
Yeah, it's sort of amazing that at the moment there's sort of, let's say, renaissance in this build tools. So what just happened a couple of days back is that Deno by Randall, and they published 1.5, and the big thing with 1.5 is that they introduced and implemented their compilation through SWC. So it's this very fast web compiler, or whatever they call it, but it's extremely fast. It's based on Rust. It seems like a huge leap forward in terms of compilation speed for Deno at least. So I'm super excited about this new generation of build tools.
Yeah, this seems to be the pattern, right? Like developing JavaScript build tools in other languages other than JavaScript. Up until now, we've had JavaScript building JavaScript, and by nature it's slow. But when you get Go building JavaScript or Rust building JavaScript, it's a totally different story.
Yeah, it seems to give you massive performance. And you see this in Deno, as it's mainly based on Rust, and I think it's going to be even more Rust code in the future. So now it's they say it's roughly about as fast as Node, but it's there was one important point about Deno was that maybe it's not as fast, but it's more consistent. So, or the worst case is not as bad, or something like that. But it's let's say now it feels like everything is starting over again. So now we're dealing the cards again somehow. But that's just my personal feeling that a lot might happen in the next year or two.
Yeah, I think so. I think yeah, definitely right on that one.
Yeah. So we're really close to start. So I guess good luck, everyone. We're going to have exciting event because we have we recorded Diego's talk beforehand because it's safer for us. But we have live questions and answers, and the remainder of the event is going to be live. So it's a lot of excitement for everyone included. And yeah, I guess we moved on to the slides. Yeah. So this time we're going to discuss because each and every session is themed somehow. So this time the theme is going to be about lessons learned, because we feel it's a good way to get some discussion going and find good speakers. And so I'm going to, normally we have an external host or MC. I'm behind the scenes somewhere because I'm the director of React Finland. My name is Juho Vepsäläinen, and you might know me from the Survive.js effort. It's a couple of books and a blog with a lot of posts. And the first talk is going to be about React by Diego Hatz. I hope I got the name right. It's always difficult for Finns, but it's a toolkit that it gives you like a basic primitives for building your own components. And one of the points is that you get something that's accessible by default, because it's very hard to build accessible user interfaces. So why not to have something to help with that? So we will learn about React. And maybe That's our hope. The way we run this event is that we provide both free and premium streams. So the free stream is available through YouTube. And we have these Q&As and panel at the end that will be available later after we produce the material. And for premium, you will get this access to this material instantly. So we do this to try to capture some of the money back from related to the production costs, so that we can keep doing this in the future. And then we have this ongoing call for papers, because we always try to find a good mix of speakers. So you can find this online and on our website. So we welcome a lot of different topics, and then I try to pick something that's fitting for our team. The next event will take place at the beginning of December, and it's going to be focused around React performance or generally performance. I have 3 speakers in line. So you might know Nick Graf from previous React Finland conferences. And then we have Andrei Goncharov and Milesia McGregor. So we have 3 great talks or sessions waiting at the 2nd of December. And then to participate, you can join us at Slack. Join the Slack through React Finland, slack.com. And you can actually find the registration link at our site. So if you are not registered yet, go to the React Finland site, reactfinland.fi, register and join the Slack. That's how we get in. And this time we're changing the format a tiny bit. So we're doing these tiny polls during the talks. So we're going to ask you a question, and during the session you can answer the question, and then we discuss poll results with the speakers after the session. So go to Slido and use the code 64127, and then you can answer, and hopefully we get some interesting outcomes. And while you do that, you can also ask questions that we are going to discuss with the speakers. So while you answer the polls, you can send questions to us. And of course, online events like this, they will not be possible, or of course they will be possible, but not at the same extent or scope without sponsors. So we have 3 great gold sponsors: Go4, Futurist, and Smartly.io. And for silver, we have Digia, Elisa, Alma, and Columbia Road. And for bronze, Quantic, Vincit, Wunder, Netum, and Cybercom group. So as you know, a lot of these companies you might have never heard of unless you're a Finn. So we have a lot of Finnish companies supporting us, and we're extremely grateful for the support, especially during these difficult times as we have to go through this pandemic. And as for all of our events, we follow this Berlin Code of Conduct. So even if the event is online, we're committed to providing a safe space for everyone involved. So if something weird happens during the event, for instance, in Slack, you should, for instance, you can contact me or one of the organizers through Slack, and we will figure out how to deal with the situation. But it's important to have some kind of code of conduct so that people know to behave. Of course, you will behave otherwise, but it's important to state. So next, we will move to the first session about React with Diego Hatz. And I think I found Diego around 1 year ago, because I run these interviews through my blog. I figured that React looks cool. It's interesting new technology that maybe deserves more eyes or popularity. So then I interviewed Diego, and now we're going to learn more about the toolkit. And our question for this session is, what kind of element or DOM element do you use when you need a generic clickable element? So you have something that you want to click. What DOM element do you use for this? So you can answer through Slido, and then we discuss the results later. So let's go with Diego and Rekit and learn more about the topic.
First, let's take a look at this inaccessible button with our space keys as it's expected in a button. So let's imagine we have a React custom hook called useButton that returns props that we could pass to our component. Or we could have a button component where instead of passing children directly as an element, we would pass children as a function. And this function would receive the accessible button props. Then we could pass those props to our inaccessible component. Or finally, more easily, what if we could just pass our inaccessible component to the as prop in the accessible button component, and the button component itself would be responsible for injecting accessible props into the inaccessible button with modal component. Well, in all these cases, I expect that the useButton hook and the button component, either with the render props or the as prop, would fix the accessibility issues of our inaccessible button with modal component. So here, for example, I could move focus onto the button by pressing tab and activate it with enter. The moment I close the modal, the focus moves back to the button. So my name is Diego Haas. You can find me on Twitter or GitHub at Diego Haas. I'm the author of React, which is an open source library that helps you build accessible components for your React app. It provides very handy composition APIs, and I'm going to talk about some of them here. And after almost 2 years working with these APIs, both internally and in the library and as a user in other projects, I've learned the pros and cons of each of these APIs, and I'd like to share them with you here. Also, I'm a JavaScript engineer at Automatic, which is the company behind WordPress.com, WooCommerce, Tumblr, and several other projects. We do a lot of challenging open source JavaScript and React projects. And in my whole career, this is the only company that I really recommend people applying. So I really recommend you to take a look at our site, automatic.com. The first thing I want to talk about is something I call the open-close component, which is based in one of the solid principles, the open-close principle, which states that an entity should be open for extension but closed for modification. In practice, when we apply this into React components, it means that we can easily extend the functionality of a component without having to touch its own code. So let's take a look again at our inaccessible button with modal component. I've also added a class name and style props here to make the explanation more complete. And the first thing we have to do here is choosing an element that will be the main element of our component. In this case, it's the button. So we have to receive props in our component and spread them into this button. Also, we have to enable the style to be customized from outside without having to modify the internals. So we'll merge the class name and the style props. We also have to merge the event props, so we can also add events from outside, and also forward the ref prop. If the component is already using a ref internally, we would also have to merge the refs. Well, it may look a bit complicated, but this is exactly what you get from styled components, for example. The component you create with styled components is itself an open-close component, and this could be used here as well. And these are the modifications we need to make to our component to make it open for extension. And now we can inject other props into it to enhance its functionality, or in our case, to fix an accessibility issue. Now I'm going to talk about 3 different patterns we can use to provide props for this component. The first one is what I call component hooks. So here, for example, we have a very simple component. To turn it into a component hook, the first thing we have to do is renaming the component to useButton. Then instead of returning a button element, we'll return an object with the props that could be passed over to a button element later. And since we want to make it accessible by default, no matter which element these props get passed to, we add other props to guarantee that the final element will be accessible. And this is our hook. And why is this a hook? Why is this named use button and not just something like get button props? Since it doesn't use any other hook inside, it doesn't need to be a hook, right? Well, that's the same reason we create a button component and not just a render button function. The fact that the button has internal hooks or not is just an implementation detail, and that's why I call it a component hook. So how do we use it? Well, we call the hook, it's going to return props. You can pass those props to a div, to a button element, or to our inaccessible button with modal component. And since we've also written this component hook following the open-close patterns, we can also combine it with other component hooks, like this use tooltip reference to make our button also a reference for a tooltip. So the tooltip will appear next to it. We've been using this technique to build React components internally, and all the components in React are made up of component hooks, and this is what I've learned about this so far. So what's the pros of this approach? The first one is the React element tree. By combining only components, we'll get a bigger element tree, whereas with component hooks, we would have only one item, which is the component that is using the component hook. But you still have the ability to inspect the component hooks that are being used through React DevTools. And besides helping with the element tree visualization, this also gives you a little performance benefit because with fewer components, React will also have less work to do. But this is more of curiosity than information that you should rely on to make your decisions, because it depends a lot on the complexity of your components or how many components you are rendering. Most of the time, although it's something good, the benefit is very small. Well, and now we have the cons of this approach. So the first one is the rules of hooks. So unlike components, we can't use hooks within conditions or dynamic loops. And because by design, we can only return props and not components, we can't make use of React context or React portal because they need components. And also, we can't use things like styled components in our component hooks. So if you're creating component hooks to abstract styles, you will only be able to use class name and style props. The second technique is render props. So taking this simple button component as an example again, we can take advantage of the use button hook we just created, since it already implements all the accessible button logic that we need. Then we'll verify if the children prop is a function. If it's a function, instead of returning the element, we'll just call the children function passing the props as the argument. So how do we use this? Instead of passing a children element directly, we pass a function that receives props, which we can pass over to other components, like our inaccessible button with modal component. And the same way as component hooks, if we use the open-close patterns in the components that implement render props, we can also combine them with other components with render props, like the tooltip reference, and this will work the same way as the component hooks. So what are the pros? Well, it's a component. It's not subject to the rules of hooks. We can also render components like React portal and context. Since we also expect to receive an element as a result of calling the children function, we can simply wrap this element with other component. What are the cons? So comparing to component hooks, we'll get a bigger element tree. And another problem is that if you have to deal with performance issues, it's harder to do it with render props. For example, this state collocation strategy is a very effective and simple way to solve many performance issues. To give an example, we have local state in this app component, and when this state is updated, the app component will re-render together with all the elements that it renders, like the wrapper and the child elements. And if the render of these multiple child elements is causing performance issues, a simple way to fix it is by abstracting the local state into a separate component that receives children. At this point, when the local state is updated, React will only re-render the component where the local state is defined, which is the stateful component, and not the app component. It's not going to propagate the update to the components up in the tree. And since the child elements are defined in the app component, they wouldn't be re-rendered. But let's imagine that at some point requirements change, and now the child element expects to receive a prop that depends on that local state, which is not defined there anymore. One thing that you can do is using render props to lift the state up, but even though it still looks like the child elements are still being rendered or still being defined in the app component, actually the thing that is being defined here is only an anonymous function that receives a value. This function will be actually called in the stateful component, which will be responsible for rendering the child elements. For React, it would be the same as rendering the child element directly there. So at this point, we lose our state collocation optimization. Well, another way to solve that is by using React Memo. So instead of state collocation, we could simply use React Memo, and then React would compare the previous props with the next props, and it would only re-render the child component if the props are different. Then the child elements wouldn't be re-rendered every time the local state is updated, but only when this selected prop is modified to true or false. But what if the child component also implemented render props? Render props are usually passed as inline functions, which are recreated on every render. So whenever the local state gets updated, the app component will be re-rendered and a new children function will be defined. This children prop will be different from the previous children prop, and React Memo will be always invalidated. And then we have the last technique that I want to talk about, which is component injection, or the sprop, which is how it's usually implemented. So to implement this, we can use the same component that we have been using for the render props. We'll accept an sprop, which we rename to a capitalized name so we can use it in JSX. And then we verify. If this sprop has been passed, then we render that component passing the other props to it. And now we have a single component that makes a use of component hooks and provides render props and component injection APIs. So how do we use it? We'll simply pass another component that must follow the open-close patterns to this sprop. And this can be our accessible button with modal component or a styled component, for example. And what are the pros? So like render props, it's a component, so we are free to render it dynamically or use other components internally. And other advantage is that this approach solves our problem with React Memo and render props. So taking our render props example, instead of passing children as a function, we'll just pass a prop that is constant, since our accessible button with modal component is a function that is declared outside of the scope of this component. So the time React Memo runs its comparison, the sprop will be always the same as the previous prop. And this is actually so powerful that even though our inaccessible button with modal component doesn't use React Memo, you will get the benefit of React Memo. And it's going to update normally when it's local state updates, because local state and context bypass React Memo. Another advantage is that with component injection, we have a much cleaner and reasonable code comparing to render props. So I think we can conclude with that component injection is the best of the approaches, right? Yeah, well, the same way it can be less verbose, it can also be more verbose depending on what you are trying to do. For example, with render props, you can easily pass props to another prop instead of just spreading them onto the component. With component injection, though, you can't easily do this. You can't pass an inline function to the S prop because this prop expects to receive a component that will be passed over to React create element. In this case, you would be passing a different component on every render, and React would not update but mount a new component on every render, which is definitely not what you want. So in order to achieve this with the S prop, you have to create this intermediate component. And things get even more complicated if you take TypeScript into account. It could be a whole talk only talking about the S prop and TypeScript. So you can access this URL, bit.ly/TypeScript-s-prop, where you will find a boilerplate on how to do that. But even so, this is far from ideal. But the biggest problem that I see with component injection is the prop name collision. So for example, we have our button component, which receives an S prop, and our inaccessible button with modal component, which receives a custom label prop, whose implementation renders a visible label on the page. And then the way we combine these components is by using button, passing the other component to the S prop, and also the label prop. And since button passes down all the props that it doesn't use, the inaccessible button with modal components would receive this label prop and render as a children in the div. But let's go back to our button component. What if at some point we add a new feature to this component, and now it's going to receive a label prop and render it as an aria label attribute in the HTML, which is not visible on the page. So since it's a custom prop and button uses that, it's not going to pass that prop down. Otherwise, you would end up with a bunch of unknown props in your HTML. And also React would also complain about that with its unknown props warning. So this naive update on button would break our composition, because now the label prop wouldn't be passed to the inaccessible button with modal components anymore. This wouldn't happen with render props, for example. So what's your conclusion on this topic? Well, I'll share mine, but I invite you to think about it as well. I think component hooks are great for combining different behaviors within a component library. The library could export only components, but be composed on top of multiple component hooks. And that's exactly how React is built internally. It also exports the component hooks, so you can use them in your component library as well. But it's important to be aware of the limitations of hooks. And render props are still very good for general use, especially when you don't need to deal with performance issues, which is honestly most of the cases. Most of the time, you don't need to optimize performance at the component level. And it's also good when you want to combine different components that might have conflicting props. And component injection, or the S prop, works very well for simple cases. For example, when components don't have custom props. It's also the best option, in my opinion, for when you are using React Memo. But you do need to take care of how you name your props. You can name them very specifically in a way that a collision would be very unlikely to happen, or when the outcome is very obvious. For example, you may have a dialog component that accepts a hide on-click outside prop, and if there is another component that accepts the same prop and you combine them, you will be probably fine because both components would probably do the same thing with that prop. Well, I'm not done yet. There is another thing I would like to talk about. And so the best way to fix our inaccessible button with modal component is by just using a button element instead of a div. This is the most effective way to fix this, and this is how you should be doing it. So all the things that I'm talking about here would be unnecessary. But if we build this component in an open-close way, we have the possibility to render this component in different contexts. For example, React has a menu item component that accepts both render props and the edge prop. And by the way, there is also a use menu item component hook. But we can combine it with our button with modal component, and it automatically becomes a menu item that opens a modal when you click on it, and focus the menu item after the modal is closed. Or there is another cool component that is currently in experimental phase, the combo box. And you could combine a combo box option with our component, and you would have a combo box with an option that opens a modal and moves focus back to the combo box after closing the modal. And this is really, really powerful because button with modal is an open-close component. It's completely agnostic about the context where it will be rendered. And that's why it can be turned into a combo box option or menu item, even though it doesn't know this component. You could imagine that button with modal is a component you import from library A, and the combo box option is a component you import from library B or from React. And you can combine them without having to send PRs to the repository to modify their code and enhance their functionalities. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the talk, Diego. I think it's really cool what you've done with React. And I think we're going to check out the poll first. So we were asking about what kind of DOM element would you use when you need to generate clickable element? And majority answered a button, and some people answered a link. So what do you think of the results? Or was this expected? Or
yeah, I'm happy to see that. Actually, I've seen that question in the conference.
T-minus 30 seconds.
It seems to me that what we have here is an entire generation of young people.
We are here today at the Rise of Futulon in Tampere 2019. That's where societal impact, learning and personal growth come together.
We have a successful launch of Futulon 2019. Catering is reporting that the beer chill-down procedure is proceeding nominally and the coffee machines are loading.
Every morning when I wake up, I think about the colleagues I get to work with every day. I'm really proud of the team that I'm in right now. Every day in Digia, I get to come in and face new challenging programming issues that we have. So I really like that about the workplace. In the current project, I get to work with very hot topics which is on the market right now. There's, for example, microservices they talk about a lot, and also cloud computing, etc. If you're still searching for your path in the technology space or want to try new technologies or push your career, I think Digia is definitely the place to apply for.
You are learning many different ways that are going to be really useful in the future. Not just technology, but also like how to build a company, how to build a team, how to manage all of that. You have a lot of flexibility to deciding what kind of projects you want to work. You can move from team to team and work more focusing in front-end stuff if you want, or you can learn more about I don't know, like data science, for example. And Smartly offers really great opportunity if you want also to see the customer perspective. You can travel and meet these customers that are using your product, also participate in the events that we are organizing with that kind of customers. Me, myself, I have the opportunity to be also speaking in those conferences and talking about how we develop the product in Smartly, what are going to be new things that we are bringing on. Usually our customers are really, really advanced, so you always learn how to even bring the product forward, and you get really good feedback about the things that you.
Moi, mä oon Mikko Kuitunen. Mä perustin Vincitin vuonna 2007 työpaikaksi, johon ei vituta mennä töihin, edes maanantaina. Tässä ollaan onnistuttu varmaan aika hyvin, kun kerran meidät valittiin Euroopan parhaaksi työpaikaksi. Alussa meitä oli 2, nyt jo monta sataa. Me toimitaan Hervannan lisäksi Helsingissä, Savonlinnassa ja Piilaaksossa. Saimme lentävän lähdön, mutta puoli vuotta perustamisen jälkeen ainoa asiakkaamme antoi tulosvaroituksen, lopetti hommat ja pian oltiinkin konkurssin partaalla. Kovalla työllä siitäkin selvittiin. Aina välillä joku pahoittaa mielensä meidän toiminnasta. Ollaan esimerkiksi haluttu palkata lisää naisia ja pidetty positiiviset YT-neuvottelut. No, jos kukaan ei suutu, mikään ei muutu. Vincitin bisnestä on palvelumuotoilu, ohjelmointi ja muut ATK-palvelut. Ja me ollaan saatu toteuttaa todella mielenkiintoisia projekteja. Kerron muutaman esimerkin. Lähes kaikista maailman sairaaloista löytyy lääketieteellisiä härveleitä, joita ollaan oltu toteuttamassa. Sitä paljon puhuttua IoT:tä tehdään muun muassa Metson kivenmurskaimille ja muille liikkuville työkoneille. Oral-hammaslääkäreiden ollaan oltu vahvasti mukana. Superoperaattor autopesuloiden kaikki teknologia on meidän kehittämää. Sitä on käytössä Suomen lisäksi muissa Euroopan maissa, Australiassa ja Jenkeissä. Myös Hesen mobiilisovellus on meidän tekemä. Sillä pystyy kätevästi ohittamaan jonon. Vincit muuten on latinaa ja tarkoittaa voittamista ja valloittamista. Ja sitähän me ollaan tehty. Kasvamista tärkeämpää on kuitenkin se, että meillä on aina huomenna tyytyväisemmät asiakkaat ja tyytyväisemmät työntekijät kuin tänään.
I like to work at Columbia Road because I get to work in really interesting client cases, use cool technologies, and I get to choose my own tools.
I also like varying projects. I won't be stuck with any specific tech stack.
I like Columbia Road because it's a crossroad between the technology and business.
Working here is challenging but interesting at the same time.
I love how we always try for excellence.
I love that people are helping each other so actively. Whenever you need help, you just ask in Slack and there's multiple people who will answer you.
Our equality, transparency and the opportunities to learn more.
I like the flexible working hours.
I love my coffee breaks.
I really like our high quality green tea and coffee at the office.
We know when to be serious and we also know when not to be serious.
Of course, the parties are good.
Columbia Road afterworks and yellow trains.
Singing 90s rap karaoke at our afterworks.
I love people at Columbia Road. They are so nice and awesome.
I feel like I'm working with my friends.
A sense of family and community.
Fantastic colleagues.
The most fun and the most professional people in the industry.
I like the amazing people that we have.
The people.
People and the atmosphere.
Discussing the topic. So the story is that I discovered Ocean Wind by accident because I wrote my own solution, which you heard about in the last session, and I was using Tailwind, but then it somehow didn't fit the way I'm working. And then I found Ocean Wind, and that was perfect fit for what I'm doing. For Luke's session, we have a question. What's your preferred styling solution with React? And again, you can answer at Slido, and I would expect that we get a lot of different answers because it seems like there's no one correct way to handle styling with React. So likely we're gonna get a lot of discussion about the topic. But let's get started with Luke and Ocean Wind. Okay, so I guess the starting point for this session might be that, I mean, how did you even find React? Why did you become a React developer in the first place? What brought you to React? Yeah, I think you have to unmute first.
The bar disappeared.
Yeah,
it's that's an interesting question. I mean, I didn't start anywhere close to being a React developer, I guess. In fact, I probably put it off for as long as possible for some reason. But a long time ago, maybe 10 years ago, I started off building online casinos with Backbone and Marionette. That was my first developer job. That was still sort of when jQuery was around. And then I went to work in America for a little bit for CS50, which is Harvard's Introduction to Computer Science. And there they hadn't adopted React yet, but they wanted a video player making. And so went ahead and sort of made my own virtual DOM framework weird thing. In fact, I didn't use the virtual DOM, but the syntax was pretty similar. But that was all vanilla JS, and I sort of proved to myself that I could do that. I learned a lot building those kind of things, interfaces, I guess. And shortly after that, though, I found a little framework called HyperApp, which is like famously a 1 kilobyte JavaScript framework with view and state management in there. It kind of takes after Elm in a weird way, or aspires to the single state architecture and things like that. And from then, I went back and forth on frameworks. It was quite an exciting time back then. You know, there was a lot of innovation in that space, a lot more than I think we had now. I think some people complained about it, but since then, React was popularized. It became the lowest common denominator if you're making UIs. And so once hooks came along, it sort of satisfied my functional approach to things. And that's about when I got on board the React train.
Yeah, it's really a big train. I mean, I still remember how we wrote React in the beginning. It's quite different, but I always felt that it's missing this functions should be the building block. And once they did the hooks, now you can use functions for anything you want. Just a little bit about CSS. So, what's your background with CSS? How did you get started with CSS in React? What approaches did you use before?
I mean, I started CSS at the same time I started like HTML, I guess. I always enjoyed laying things out on a page. Like I always like making posters, and for the web it was Photoshop, and that power to, you know, say every text element on the page, please be red or please be blue. That was like, to do that programmatically was quite enticing. So I was immediately taken by CSS, and I probably sunk a lot of time, most of my time, programming time into CSS. And by nature there, I guess, I've tried most approaches, you know, vanilla CSS, Sass, less, post CSS, CSS modules, CSS and JS, styled components, and more recently, something like, you know, things like Tailwind.
Yeah, but so let's discuss Tailwind a little bit. So for anyone that doesn't know, Tailwind implements this utility-based approach for CSS. So it's sort of like you take utility idea from CSS and JS and put these utilities in HTML. So it's like CSS and JS without JS. It's like sort of one way to put it, maybe. Or how would you describe Tailwind?
It's a set of predefined tokens, I guess, that allow you to describe how things should look on the page. You know, you say BG-red 500, you're going to get a red background.
Yeah, cool. And I guess the issue, at least for me, and likely for you as well, is that with Tailwind, what they provide is this one very big CSS file. And then you use the classes from the CSS file, and then at the end, there is a tool for CSS that's going to eliminate the classes that you don't need. So where did the idea for Oceanwind come from? Why did you decide to write Oceanwind, or what was the background of the project? Like, why to write your own solution for styling?
So I think I probably followed a similar path to you. Like I saw the idea, and you know, at first I was kind of like, oh, this is interesting. Like I think 5 years ago, I was actually trying to make something called here, like if you can see on the screen, called Prototype.
Yeah, we can make the screen a little bigger, so it's
yeah, everything
with full screen.
You know, it was this thing called Prototype 5 years ago now, and you know, I had the same sort of idea, right? Like that we could take these things that I was writing all the time. I am still a very slow typer, and abbreviate them to, you know, this is Tailwind on steroids, I guess, like justify content, space between. It's just the starting letters of each of the things. But I tried to make as many of these as possible and tried to think about how you could apply them to multiple elements, things like this. And so it was already sort of an idea I'd had. And when I started to see Tailwind get popularized, I thought, this, you know, this is my chance. I can have what I've always wanted. And I imported the CSS file, the base one, the big file. I think it's 2.8 megabytes or something, that has every single possible generated rule in Tailwind rule in one big file. And I just imported it into a local project and off I went. And it is amazing how productive you can be, right? Just writing class names and having things change shape and size and color. But then it came to the crunch, I guess, where you had to remove all the stuff you didn't want. You don't want to ship 2.8 megabytes of CSS with like a JavaScript app that weighs less than 10 kilobytes or something like that. So then I tried to set up the purge bit, and like immediately my brain went, no. I'm already quite famously against build steps for their like complexity often. And so I wasn't about to sort of implement or introduce a build step to my personal projects just so I could use Tailwind. So in that respect, I didn't really have much option. So I decided to reverse engineer it, like you said at the beginning, flip it on its head.
Yeah, I think that's what happened. So with the implementation, I mean, maybe it's good that we show a demonstration first. So you have this in-browser demo, because so just to tell a little bit about OceanWind is that because I started using OceanWind, and my use case has to do with server-side rendering, and then what happened? I did a small pull request adding this feature, so we can actually use this solution in browser as a runtime, and you can also use it. Let's say you make a static site, so you could use the solution to generate extremely minimal CSS for every single page. Mm-hmm. But maybe we look at the runtime demonstration so people get the idea of the approach.
Yeah, I mean, there's not much to it, weirdly, you know. When
that's the thing.
Yeah, I mean, this is the beauty of it. So I guess I'll sort of roll it back a tiny bit, and I kind of knew it was possible to like write some code, or like a compiler, if you like, that would take instructions like BG red 500 or BG purple 500, and then translate it into the appropriate key value pairs for CSS. Like by nature, it's atomic, kind of. It's not strictly atomic Tailwind, but usually you have one directive, I like to call it, like BG white, BG black, and it maps one-to-one to background white or background black. And I actually saw Ocean.
Yeah, but we can make the screen really big again so people can see better.
Oops, I'll just do Ocean. So there's this really cool library that I actually saw just by happenstance on Twitter, I think, and then had a look into it, and it said Atomic CSS with a featherweight runtime. And I thought, wow, if you mix this with the sort of idea I had about this Tailwind language, you could end up with something really cool. And so, although OceanWind is kind of dependency free, I've actually vended a version of this. Thank you, Christoph. And it handles all the applying styles to the web page, if you like, the DOM. And it handled all the server-side rendering for me. So I knew once I had the CSS and JS shape, we could add it to the DOM and everything would be good, which pretty much just left translations, right? You have to write something that will take these directives, these BG red 500. I keep using it as an example, but how do you turn this and every other directive in the Tailwind documentation into actual CSS in JS? And we actually sort of did that with the help of one of my colleagues, Phil Buckton, who is a genius for the record. And he wrote this, this sort of code gen script here using Babel code gen. We were driving it with this grammar file here. Sorry, I'm going to make this bigger again.
Yeah. So how did you come with about the grammar? So did you generate the grammar from some existing code, or where did the grammar come from?
Crazily, the grammar was all, like pretty much all of, so everything in comments here came from the Tailwind documentation.
Yeah,
so
you wrote it by hand, so you had some kind of...
Yeah, no, this bit was painstakingly done by hand. Phil and I sort of, I started at the top, he started at the bottom. We took every example from the Tailwind documentation to make sure we covered everything. And here, for example, you can see that border box translates to box sizing border box. Box content is box sizing content. And so
the great thing about this approach is that we get this sort of definition of Tailwind without Tailwind. So the project doesn't depend on Tailwind. So it just looks the same, but it has nothing to do with it in the end.
Correct. It uses no code from Tailwind.
So there's no code from Tailwind project.
Yeah. So I mean, Phil, in the genius here, has managed to translate these kind of grammars into a big switch statement. That was pretty much the approach we took. I think there's a lot of this. You can see there's a lot of cases. So in the back of my head here, even though I knew this was possible, it's really something you can't prove is possible until you've done everything. You know,
exactly.
Like, so it was quite daunting. And talk about burnout. Like, I think I burned out in the middle of this project. There is literally thousands of definitions here. What's interesting about this approach, though, is that like you see all these definitions here, like all these for colors, especially this thing's highlighted here, but all the colors here, instead of having to make hundreds of definitions, the grammar for all colors is just this amount of code. So this is really interesting to see.
Yeah, it's really compact. And if I remember right, I think Tailwind itself is implemented in, I think it's post-CSS plugins or so. So there is no official grammar for Tailwind. And
no, there is not.
Yeah, so they could more or less take the grammar from this project and generate what they have. So, but,
yeah, and I think Adam
of course
has said he's thought about it a few times already.
So in some way, these projects, they might come together one day, or maybe they just adopt this approach and drop the. I mean, maybe that would be even the best. So we would not need Birch CSS with Tailwind if they went this way.
Yeah, so we haven't really dug into how it differentiates yet, but you know, we will get onto that, and probably before that, it's useful to see that this is the generated code from that code gen, and you know, like I said before, it's just a big switch statement. What we do is we break up the directives by hyphen separators, and then we count the length of it. So BG red 500 has 3 parts. That means we would go into a lower down switch statement. This switch here is for cases or directives with 1 part. So like hidden will output display none. Static, fixed, absolute, relative, and sticky, they can nicely be sort of combined into position and then the thing that you gave it, the case. So position static, position fixed, position absolute. So when we saw this, it was kind of a relief because we realized it's not going to be as big as we initially thought, which was one of our sort of fears initially. Yeah, so once that was made, that was like 1,000 lines of code generated for us. It probably covered 90% of the API. I don't know, it's hard to tell. But there were definitely edge cases that were hard to define programmatically. They maybe didn't fit the sort of rules that we'd written. And so I sort of just gave in with the code gen and decided to go through it by hand with a fine tooth comb and fill in all the rest of the translations and optimize some of the stuff that the code gen had put in sort of naively.
Yeah, and so from this switch case, we go to something that you're passing to Ocean. So maybe you want to show the transformation from this to actual CSS. Maybe that's interesting to understand.
Yeah, so I guess once we'd written all these definitions, we wanted to test it. And so the testing is a good example of what is happening under the hood. So given top auto, we just want to make sure that Ocean Wind returns top auto. Given top 0, we want to do top 0. Now, once you have this,
we can make it bigger again so people see.
Yeah, so you go through and test all these cases in isolation, I guess. And then when you add these things together, so this is the main sort of index of the project. This is where it takes input and turns it into output. And it's mostly here. So first we normalize the strings. Here's what this means is like remove any double spaces, because we're in JavaScript land here. So for a start, you feed Ocean Wind. This is one way of feeding it directives, is in tag template literals. So here you can see we're feeding it font sans serif, width full, height, whatever this definition is, item center, justify center. So what Ocean Wind will do is first like take this big multi-line string and just turn it into an array of directives of what it thinks it needs to process. It does that here. Then we go through each rule. We say if we've seen the rule or not. And then we split out directive from variants. So variants, if you don't know, are like media queries. So you could write sem bg red, and that will only apply background red on small screens. So anything before colons essentially are variants. You could also do things like hover. So this would only apply background red and hover. We split out those things, and then we go ahead and translate any of each directive according to some provided theme. If we don't find a translation, we warn the user. Then we apply the variants. Then we return a translation. So now we have a list of translations. Like you used to have BG Red 500, now you have background colon and a hex number.
Yeah, expanded, yeah.
Yeah, and so once you have all these separated in an array, I just go through and merge all of these things into one big CSS and JS object. And it's at this point that Ocean takes over. So you can imagine now, you know, we have a whatever readable stream. Obviously, that's what I wanted. Text color, whatever. And we just want this adding to the DOM, and we want a class name. That's all I want now. And Ocean does this really well. It literally goes through each of these CSS and JS rules and creates a class name for it. So we can see that, probably see that in action better in the browser.
Yeah, one thing I was thinking about, actually, I mentioned about it in the issue tracker, is that how we might use CSS variables. So maybe this will be the place, because let's say I want to add teaming on top of Ocean Wind. I would like to inject these CSS variable tokens and then control the variables later somehow. I guess that will be the spot or so.
Yeah, I mean, luckily for us, Ocean supports CSS variables, and Tailwind do use them in their implementation. They do it for special rules like transform, which might have multiple parts. And so instead of creating all the different variations of transforms that are possible, they actually just apply one transform rule with scale, translate, rotate, and whatever. And then they use the CSS variables to inject the appropriate values into each of those directives. That was a weird thing to actually try emulate without CSS variables, but I did it in a weird, hacky way. But here's probably a good example of everything sort of happening in a row. I just tried it earlier and it seems to work. So first we're going to await the import of Ocean Wind from unpackage, and we'll call that O. Hopefully you can see that. So now we have an O, I believe, and you can see it's a module, which is fine. And we use O default, the default export, and we know that the default export will take a list of directives, right? Like BG, white. Now, if I hit enter, Ocean Wind is going to process just these directives. Like at the moment, let's pretend nothing exists on the page. There are no CSS rules anywhere. But if I click this, it returns a string. This string is a space delimited string, and it contains two class names. Now, just like in CSS and JS, these class names scope over some styles, right? So we could probably actually see that. If I took these, like, how do we know what's in it? And this is another issue I think you raised on the repo, is like, we gave in this very clear human readable directives, and we got out this sort of gibberish, which isn't actually much use to us. But when we apply it to an element, you can see we now have background white and the text is black. So that's what that gets translated to. The instructions, the CSS behind these are already added to the DOM in the top here in this ocean style tag here.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the amazing things about the approach I noticed is that what you get is very compact. So it's not going to give you a lot of CSS in the end. Because
it will
I
only
think
give you enough CSS to satisfy the requirements, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you get the minimum amount of CSS, and that led me to think that maybe we don't even have to worry about like this critical CSS or certain techniques, because you don't have much CSS to begin with. So
no, and I mean, what's even crazier is that so let's say you had 1,000 elements on the page that all had background red 500. You would think, oh well, maybe that it's generated 1,000 class names for this, like, because each one's unique and each one's cached. But the way Ocean works is it would check to see if it's already got a rule for background red, and if it has, it will just reuse that class name. So it'll just return that class name as part of the string. You'll only end up with one class for all those 1,000 items.
Yeah,
it's
that's like really amazing, because you end up it's just really the minimum amount of classes and CSS. So then it's just the output is great. I noticed that you added some new feature to the library just a while ago. So you started playing with the syntax. Maybe you want to show that?
Yeah. So like once I'd hit reasonable feature parity, like the API is always changing, and it's hard to keep up. Like if you find something that's missing, please do just create an issue and we'll create a translation for it. But so once you've done that, you can start to go into cool stuff that isn't necessarily possible with a traditional Tailwind approach. First thing there in this regard is probably the function signature. So this was another thing you're inspired by yourself. Before I just supported this, like these backticks, and you could pass in a set of rules. You could do it on the multi-line. Everything was good. And I thought, well, quite naturally, you should be able to support interpolation. So we did that. Then you said that you were using arrays quite a lot to pass in rules, which I can see as a sensible use case. So we decided to support that. While we were at it, I thought, let's sort of filter out faulty values so that you could do something similar to this. It's quite commonly seen with object syntax, whereby you pass a rule and then whether it should be applied or not. So in this case, both rules should be applied, and in this one, rounded should be ignored.
So
That's pretty
about
nice,
this, do you think it's useful for React developers? So how is it easy it will be something like this to integrate to a React project? So let's say we want to use Ocean Wind with React.
Yeah, so let's just have a look at that. Oh, it's up here. I made this demo for that. I mean, this demo uses Preact, which is what I've been almost exclusively building applications out of these days. But you can see we import render and HTML, and then we import Ocean Wind here. I take this themed version. I extend the theme with rotate 5, just so I can use it later. It's more an example of that. Example of an abstracted style here. An example of a render. So here you can just see that we put the O call, the call to Ocean Wind, just inside the class name as a class name prop. And that will get turned into that string that I showed you earlier, which already has appended the styles to the style tag at the top of the page. And so you will see the results here. One more thing to note here is that because we can choose the syntax inside of here, we're not limited by like class name, general class name structures or syntax. We can nest things like this. So usually you would have had to write hover colon rotate 5, hover colon state 150, hover colon cursor pointer. But here I've written a little normalizer that essentially expands that, a bit like in math, where you would multiply that by that, that by that, that by that. And that's what ends up getting applied here. So when we hover over, those 3 rules get applied.
Yeah, it's really cool because I think there's some room for expansion and for playing around with the syntax. And my feeling is that it will be easy to integrate to different environments, not just React. I mean, I use it in something that's not React, and it was very, very simple to do.
Yeah, I mean, on the in the docs, I tried to emphasize that this is completely framework agnostic. It literally just takes some strings and returns you some more strings, with the side effect of adding some styles to the DOM, which can, as you have demonstrated here, be abstracted out and then server-side rendered, which essentially abstracts away all the runtime costs that people might be scared of generally. I mean
that's the amazing thing, that it's I mean, it's compact, it's performant. I mean, what will be interesting to know is what's the kind of the cost. I mean, because every time you use some CSS solution, there is some cost related to generating the CSS, but I don't know if there is any benchmark or so.
I remember Phil did do some benchmarks, and he was quite impressed. Like, I think he pretty much made style components along with some other people, so he knew what to expect. And I do remember him being quite surprised, but I think that's next on the list, is just to prove that this has desirable perf characteristics, I guess, at scale.
Yeah, and my feeling was that there's some room for improving the solution, because we can maybe memorize some parts or cache some results.
Very under optimized. There's also almost no optimization. It's just the raw transforms going on at the moment. I think caching directives and
it's events. So I guess we move on to the Q&A. So thanks for the session. I hope people learned about the approach and how it goes together and try it. So I guess we move on to the poll results now. So what's your preferred starting solution with React? And at least for me, it's a little surprising that half responded that they just use vanilla CSS. And then I think it's 8 people responding with it, but still 25% use SAS and 25 some other approach. And what's surprising for me is that nobody is using CSS and JS in this case. I guess if more people answered, that will go up, but that's the biggest surprise. How about, do you notice anything weird yourself here, or?
My name is Josef Hjelström. I'm a senior specialist here in Futurist Tampere office. My main area of focus is mobile applications. I've been developing different mobile applications, different platforms for almost 15 years and 3 years in Futurist. We kind of take our job seriously, but on the other hand, we are kind of not taking ourselves too seriously. Lately I've been working in this like remote setup where we are doing a project for German car manufacturer in cooperation with our Berlin and Helsinki teams. So we've been doing full stack web development with React and TypeScript and backend side with serverless AWS Lambda functions. That's been a really nice project. So we were actually in Berlin for 1 week, meeting the client and getting to know with other teams from Futurist. So what makes me proud is being around these really talented individuals and being part of the company that really helps our clients to build something new. Best thing for working for Futurist, in my opinion, is the people. There's so much talent that every day basically you learn something new here.
I do like different kind of games, especially board games, and I have played over 750 different board games. It was around 2004 that I rediscovered board games again and started playing a lot of them and collecting them. Ever since been one of my main hobbies. Life and work can be thought about as a game as well, just a different kind and more serious one. In games you make a lot of decisions. You have some challenges and problems and you make decisions how you solve them. In work life it might be a little bit harder because there's much more variables, more people, more different things to take into consideration. My role at Go4 is to be the head of mobile development, so that will include sales, estimations, helping other mobile developers with their skills and knowledges. It's a mix of a lot of different responsibilities. I really enjoy discovering new things, how to use technology in new ways. Also problem solving something that I don't know if anyone has solved before. I've really enjoyed sharing my knowledge. I'm doing different kind of mentorings and going to conferences, learning new things and sharing that knowledge with others and seeing that they go like, aha, now I understand that concept as well. And that's really exciting to me.
Okay, so next up, we're going to discuss with Mikhail Novikov about this topic of burnout, because it's, I know it's not about React, but it's still important topic, especially because it's something so many developers encounter in their careers at some point at least. And our question for you is, have you ever had a burnout? So if you go to Slido and use our event code, you can answer this question, and you can also send us questions about the topic so we can respond at the end of the session. So join me on the stage, Mikhail, and let's discuss.
Hello.
Hi. So just a disclaimer that, I mean, we are not experts in the topic, and we are sort of in a privileged position. I mean, living in Finland or Austria. It's but with that said, let's go to the topic. So how would you define burnout? What's the definition of burnout for you?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up first on the disclaimer. It's just what I wanted to say is that like because we are privileged and we are programmers and we live in Finland, and I guess we are all kind of been contracting, both me and Juho, for a while. So we have like financial reserves. So burnout is much, in a way, would affect us, even though it sucks, would affect us much less than many other people. For example, I'm right now unemployed, and I'm okay with that. I can be unemployed for several months, and this won't be a big deal for me. But I imagine for lots of people, this won't be the case. So that's why I don't want to say that I'm the authority, that I'm an authority on burnouts, or that I can or that I'm a psychiatrist or psychologist who can help, and like that my experience even applies to other people. Because I don't want to speak for other people who had burnout and who were in much worse position than I was. But still, kind of, I wanted to just talk about it because maybe someone can learn from the mistakes I made.
Yeah, I think that's a good addition, because it's as we will learn, it's related to environment as well and the amount of control you have. So but let's get back to the definition. So what's your definition for burnout?
So for me, it's like extreme fatigue or like repeated stress and the consequence of repeated stress that you get from work. So unlike depression, which can be caused by like other factors, I think the kind of the critical part that separates burnout from other similar conditions is that kind of it's often work related. And it's kind of when you talk about burnout, especially like in this industry, we talk about kind of burnout related to work. And I had this funny factoid that probably isn't true. The average software developer gets burnout when they're 33. So I'm kind of right on track because I'm 33 this year. So we got the burnout right in time. I'm quite sure it's not a true fact, but it is a very common issue in our industry, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's why it's important to discuss the topic. Because my hope is that we make people more aware. And I think when it comes to life, you always tend to have these like turning points. I think for me, the first turning point was when I started writing books. So I did the startup work and whatever before that. Maybe it was a burnout or whatever, but I felt like I have to change the direction. So then I started writing and I founded my company, and then we set up the conference, and now we're talking online about burnout. So it's this let's say you have turning points in life, and I guess for some people a burnout or experience of burnout is the turning point.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think like kind of also I can really empathize with the kind of wanting to do something else, because definitely every time I had the burnout, one of the big factors there was that you don't want to do work. Like the thing that you do, the work, it becomes almost like physically painful to do. Like you kind of force yourself to get to that table in the morning, and you procrastinate through half of the day, like kind of loathing the self-hate that you can't accomplish anything. And then you kind of like spend like half an hour working, do something, but then kind of as soon as you switch activity, as soon as you do something else, for me sometimes it was like doing a computer game or like playing computer games or like I don't know, playing music, all the kind of side activities. Suddenly you feel this rush of energy. Oh my God, this is like the best thing ever. I want to do this all the time. But then as soon as like your mind goes back to work, or like you might even like have a really nice vacation for a week, and then you go back to work, and this feeling of dread basically comes back to you, and you're like, oh my God, this is like the worst thing ever. I just can't like continue even for like a minute just sitting in the computer and working again, because it just kind of just hurts.
Yeah, I get the point, and I think for me, when I started writing, one of the big changes I made in my life is that I found this application. It's called OmniFocus. It cost some money, but in retrospect, it was the first. I mean, it was the best investment I made ever. I got huge return on the money, because it let me, when you use a system to manage your life, organize your life a little bit, it means that you can push all the tasks from your mind. So you don't have to like remember that I want to do this and that on that and that time. Instead, I put everything into the system. I get projects, I get a long list of to-dos. I can plan things, I can time things. So this simple step alone, like dumping everything I had in my mind, the system, it enabled me to do a lot in the end. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because I think one of the kind of, but for me, definitely one of the big challenges when you burn out is this feeling that you have a huge amount of stuff to do. Like this kind of, it's like this pressure that always comes at you that like, oh, I have this still to be done. And you always feel like you don't have energy to actually do them. You always kind of postpone them a bit. And this kind of like, gets into this huge kind of ball of things to do that just accumulate. And I think like focusing out and trying kind of just working on one thing without thinking about the other things that you have to do would definitely help. So maybe I should try that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge thing for me, because it meant that every day, I mean, I felt like working, I will go to my list, I will start from a task, then maybe I will do another task. So I will always complete something. And even now this year, because I have a little less actual paying work, I'm working through my list. So I'm reducing the amount of items I have on my list. And then I'm making some progress. So it's sort of gamifying your life a little bit, but I don't mind.
That sounds great, and if I think this would work for me too. I have like very short attention span, and I think kind of gamification is the thing that kind of helps with that.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you had some specific experiences, and the first one had to do with the consulting company. So maybe you can tell your experience with this company you did,
yeah,
and how it went, and why you burned out in the end.
Sure. Like, yeah, I have, as I said, I have two stories in particular that I want to share. So the first one, I think it was 2018. So we already been doing consulting with in this company that I had for a while. We've been basically independent contractors, but we had like a partnership with a friend, and it was already going for several years, and it was going pretty well. Like we were really, when we made this company, we were really fed up with how stuff is in startups and how working, how kind of exhausting it is working in startups. Maybe that was also a burnout, but I think it wasn't as bad. So, but creating company was kind of very kind of liberating in a way. And so that year we were kind of decided we're going to set our own goals in terms of revenue. Like us two partners would say, okay, we will earn this amount of money, so we plan to pay ourselves this amount of salary. And I put myself a pretty ambitious goal. I thought that, oh, everything is going great, I can do it. And then I suddenly had like a month of downtime. And it wasn't like a month of downtime that I planned. It wasn't a vacation. It was basically, I just didn't have a contract for months. And then this ruined this plan. This was around like April, I think, the year, or May. That really ruined the plan that I had for the revenue. And, you know, I still wanted to have vacation. I still wanted to kind of take time off. But then I had this kind of revenue plan, and I already kind of missed it by months. And now I had to suddenly kind of figure out how I'm going to get back all that money so I can, you know, pay myself the salary that I planned myself. And like I've like rushed like that for remainder of the year until like November. At that point, I started feeling that, okay, now I have like, as I described before, like every time I went to work, I had this like feeling of dread that now I have to kind of stand up and go and do the work, and I really didn't want to do it. Even though my contract was great, and like I didn't even feel that like my job was bad, or that there was like additional pressure from a job, but just the pressure from like the things that I set for myself, the pressure to kind of work, just basically exhausted me so much that I couldn't continue working. So like it kind of resolved well. I like talked to my partner and we decided, okay, yeah, I'll just like, you know, maybe pay a bit less salary, or like you can catch up next year. So like everything was resolved like with a 5-minute conversation. I didn't have, there was no problems, there were no issues. I could have done it like in May. I could have like reduced my goals, but instead I kind of kept chugging along. I thought that, oh, it's gonna be fine. I'll just have my vacation like next year. I'll spend some time relaxing later. I'll have time. You know, it's important to earn money. I have my goals, and this got me into this cycle where I was like kind of being less and less productive, like falling ill and like having all these problems, while still chasing this kind of thing of like profitability. So yeah, that was like kind of the first thing where I was acutely aware. Okay, now I have a burnout. That was kind of
so in a way kind of. Yeah, I see now. So in the end, it was it had to do with this pressure you created for yourself,
yeah,
by setting these goals, and then yeah, I feel this sometimes, but at the same time, I know that if I don't have a deadline for something, then it's tricky to get the thing I want done. So I guess there has to be some amount of pressure in life, but maybe not too much. If it's too much, then it's too much.
Ultimately, kind of, you know, you always need to take vacations. You can't just chug along. You can't just take like 5 or like 7 days vacations. You need to have proper breaks between work. Otherwise, you just never, at least I never actually get to actually relax. So I had like several vacations during that year, but they were all like really short. And I also had like, I think it was first year I think we organized like React Finland, or like I participated in React Finland, and there was GraphQL Finland the same year.
Yeah,
and then I talked at a couple of conferences. So I really set myself very ambitious goal with lots of things happening on all the sides, and that definitely wasn't kind of nice.
It's a lot of extra work to run conferences on the side. And I guess this field we can feel the pressure when I guess the point for us is that everything looked perfect around January or February, and then everything came crashing down in March, April. So sometimes it's just that things get blown up, even if you did almost everything right. So it's
Yeah. So, but like I said, you learn stuff from burnouts. Like it's not 100% bad. I like made some active changes to my life because of those. I've committed to take longer vacations. I've committed to like actively make sure I don't work too much. I've switched from contracting like on like short-term contracts to being basically employed by an American company. So like it was contracting legally, but practically it was like employment. So I had full-time work and I could take vacations, and there was like unlimited PTO policy. So it was all kind of good in this sense. And I felt that, I'm doing a good job in that. I'm doing a good job in not working too much. But like turns out that, it's burnout don't just only happen from overwork. And like after like 1.5 years or even more at the company, I felt even worse burnout. And I kind of like, and at this point I was like, oh my God, the first time wasn't even like a real burnout. Now this is a real burnout because it felt like so much worse. And I think this time it wasn't even from overwork, because like the amount of work that I did myself was kind of reasonable. I actually kind of, I think, made big strides in having a much better work-life balance this time. But there are other issues in companies that cause burnout. And I think in this sense, there are like two main things. First was that when I joined the company, I had a very I felt the company is really nice. I'm kind of a cynical person already because I've been working for a while. So every time I join a company, I'm like kind of defensive. I'm always like, okay, this sounds like good enough, but I'm sure that there are going to be some kind of a trick at the end and stuff will go bad. But here, after some time, I like kind of got 100% on board with the company. And I was like 100%, yeah, this sounds so great. Everything is good. All the people are nice. And the company is kind of caring about the right things. And it felt really good. It felt really good to believe in something. It felt really good to be in a company where you believe in like kind of the goodness of the company itself, even though it's kind of in a way probably possible for a company to be all good. But at some point, just like with Cinderella, the golden carrot sometimes turns into pumpkin. So here, the company also like really quickly turned into pumpkin, and that wasn't nice. Like nothing. Like I never realized how much it hurts to like expect a lot from the company and then have this expectation basically blown up repeatedly. And this was like a horrible feeling to kind of you still had it in your head that the company is supposed to be good, but then all the actions company did weren't matching that. And here I am, I guess, with the burnout from that. And I guess the second factor was trying to fix stuff inside the company. And I kind of got at some point promoted in the company. I became kind of technical leader, moved into technical leadership position, and it meant I had much more responsibility. But then when we get all this responsibility and you want to try to affect the change with responsibility. But I don't think in many cases people in those positions in the company were given like opportunity to affect the change. So all that kind of all that caused me to kind of burn out a lot, because like you get really bad burnout if you're constantly trying to change something in a place where you work, and then no change happens. You're like you're struggling against this kind of wall of like, I don't know, lack of change, and kind of you break your knuckles against it and you start to bleed, and
I had similar experience when I was in army. I mean, just a long time ago. Because we have this mandatory service in Finland, and it was a time when you have to decide if you're going to become an officer, or if you go to this officer program, or if you stay in the other program. I mean, not officer, I don't know what they call it. But anyway, one of the points they made is that if you become an officer, then you can change the system, or at least try to change the system. But when you're dealing with this kind of hierarchy or rigid structure, then it's like, can you believe into that? Can you believe that you might be able to change the system from inside? So it's, I mean, I guess the point is, how do you find an organization that's a good fit for you? I mean, how do you interview for something like this? It's
yeah, it's a $1 million question, I think. Yeah, it's really hard, I guess. I guess the way to do it is try not to kind of get into the position where you're too vulnerable to, like, you know, bad things happen inside the system. Like, I mean, in a way, I guess, being able to start as a contractor and kind of being able to quit at first for like several first months, it's in a way, unfortunately, very much about like privilege, because you know, I'm able, for example, to join a company and leave them because, you know, I have a financial buffer. I am kind of in quite a big demand. I think lots of other people don't have this opportunity. They join the company and then they probably look to this company for some months. They might have mortgages, they might have like other debts, or like they just might need money to sustain themselves and their families. So in this sense, it's like I'm tempted to say, like, join the company, not like quit it, but it's like it is an option for me, but it's not an option for majority of people who are working, even in our industry. Even in industry where there's like a huge demand for developers, still it's not like everyone can just quit and find a new job. It's like a long process, and people have different kind of situations and different kind of positions. Yeah, like I wish I had an answer of how to act in this situation, how to like pre-screen the company, but I guess you can't. Maybe ask people you know inside the company. I guess that's why people, yeah.
So because I was curious about the topic, and the funny thing is that we have this national broadcasting company in Finland that you can access from abroad. So they actually have a lot of content online for free that you can access anywhere. Only problem is that you need to know Finnish for most of the content. But I mean, that's not a problem for me because I'm a Finn. So I was watching this show about burnout. So they had two episodes. Different stories about burnout. So I wanted to understand, like, are there some patterns? And it always came to the fact that it's you're doing something you don't want, or you're like forced into a position you don't want to be in, and it's work related, and it's something in the work environment. And there was this interesting example of an engineer. This engineer was working a lot, and then one day he came home. And the kid, he has a kid, and the kid came to him and was saying something, and he got really angry to the kid because the kid was interrupting him. So there was this interruption because he was thinking about work at home, and it was that point that he realized that now everything is not right, and that's when he went to doctor and found out that he has a burnout because he's too stuck in this work. I guess the point was, one point was this work-life balance. So, I mean, how do you do it? How do you separate yourself from work? Did you ever encounter this, that all you do is work, or think too much about work, or never can relax?
Yeah, definitely. One thing that really helped is uninstalling Slack from the phone. Like at the beginning of my job, like the last job that I had before I quit, I've had a Slack on my phone, and then in the evening I often checked it. And at some point, my wife said that, you know, you're never here. Like in the evening, you're kind of in the Slack, and you're always distracted, and you're always thinking about work, and you always get super stressed. So I uninstalled Slack from the phone, and then kind of it really helped, like being able not to think about work. At least in some way, it helped not thinking about work.
Yeah.
So maybe like I think it's a big problem when you work from home, especially.
Yeah, I think in
Because
these times, because we're forced to work at home. So how do you draw the limit between your own time and the working time? It's really hard. And
I think having a separate workplace is the kind of the biggest kind of thing here. Like if you're able somehow to delimit, so like don't work on the couch. Like I think that's the kind of the big thing. Like don't go to the couch where you go in the evening and work there, because this will ruin your couch for you. Now this couch is your working couch.
Yeah.
Like if you have a room, like that's great. If you don't have a room, just set up some different table. Set like a small cheap table and work there. I mean, maybe it's not perfect. Maybe it's not ergonomic, but as long as you have like a separate place which just shared with work, and then other places that you don't share with work, I think everything will be much easier. At least at first. Later, I think you get used to working remotely, and you kind of learn to like add those boundaries. But at the beginning, it's really important to make sure you have those rituals that turn your brain into the right position.
Yeah, but that makes sense. In one of the cases, there was this, let's say, YouTube producer, and he really burned out in his work because he got to a new position in the company and he got lots of responsibility and he was working really a lot. And then it came to a stop. And then I think the main tip he gave is to leave the phone to work. Or like I guess what you said was right, that we get a lot of distraction just by having the phone with us everywhere. And I had this time when I didn't even have Slack on my phone for a while, and maybe I should remove Slack again, because it's a lot of distraction and extra stress you don't need. Because you get this, you're always online in a way. Yeah. To get back to the, yeah, sure.
Yeah, we just have like last 5 minutes. Maybe we should kind of make sure we cover the some kind of conclusions.
Yeah, sure. So let's conclude this together a little bit. So a burnout, it's something work-related, so that you feel overwhelmed or feel like everything is too much. Then it's a good time to stop and maybe discuss with someone. And burnout can come from different sources, and it's likely different for everyone. And you might experience something like this without realizing later that you had some kind of issue. And I guess one point is that it's always like, let's say, it's about life skills. So it might be an opportunity to learn to live maybe better or in a different way, or learn skills and techniques that help to avoid issues in the future. Do you have any specific tips in mind or something like that?
Yeah, I guess I think burnout is a real serious condition, and it's cool to listen to conference talks about it, and good to read about it, but it's also important to make sure that if you feel like you have burnout, you probably should try going to a professional about it and go to therapy and see if this helps, because this can be really serious. You might not have the same kind of, you might be as lucky as privileged as I am, and that you can kind of easily go through the burnout and kind of have opportunity to rest and spend time. So spend time off work. It's really important that if you are able to, and if you feel you have burnout, to kind of seek professional help about it.
Yeah,
and I also wanted, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. I will finish my point after. Yeah. So you also wanted.
Yeah. So. Okay. Yeah. I just wanted to say that there are better resources about burnout, and I guess me and you, there are some very nice podcasts. For example, there's Full Stack Health by Kurt and Amberly. That is by developers, and they talk to psychological health professionals and to people who experienced things like burnout. They have 3 episodes about burnout. So I think if you want to learn more about it, they are a very good resource.
Yeah, we will link to the resources later, so you can check. But it's I think it's one of the topics that we don't speak enough about, and I think it's great we have this session, and I think we can check out the questions soon and the poll. I guess did you have anything else in mind, or should we wrap up?
I guess we can wrap up and go to Q&A. But yeah.
Okay. So thanks for the session. It was great to have you here, and let's check out the poll next. Right. So now we have a number. So we have 90% say yes, that they had a burnout in their life. So what do you think of this?
Sounds about right. I mean, that makes sense.
Yeah, so how are we gonna separate you, because we are doing an audio thing, but maybe your thing is the style guide and your thing is the academic layout. So maybe that's a good split. So about the academic layout, I love the fact that it was CSS in JavaScript that's done differently than usual CSS in JavaScript. What about?
While I was listening to your talks, I didn't notice anything. So to me, you were excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
I do like different kind of games, especially board games, and I have played over 750 different board games. It was around 2004 that I rediscovered board games again and started playing a lot of them and collecting them. Ever since been one of my main hobbies. Life and work can be thought about as a game as well, just a different kind and more serious one. In games you make a lot of decisions. You have some challenges and problems and you make decisions how you solve them. In work life it might be a little bit harder because there's much more variables, more people, more different things to take into consideration. My role at Go4 is to be the head of mobile development, so that will include sales, estimations, helping other mobile developers with their skills and knowledges. It's a mix of a lot of different responsibilities. I really enjoy discovering new things, how to use technology in new ways. Also problem solving something that I don't know if anyone has solved before. I've really enjoyed sharing my knowledge and doing different kind of mentorings and going to conferences, learning new things and sharing that knowledge with others and seeing that they go like, aha, now I understand that concept as well. And that's really exciting to me.
I definitely feel like the 9 months or so that I've been here, then I've learned just so much. The way that the hiring and the sort of culture is set up here means that there's just like a really great bunch of bright people. This attitude of hiring to elevate is a really like motivating. It's another great learning experience. I remember like attending the first Friday demos before I was working here, and like there was just some really like great feedback, great questions, like people like really picking into the details, not some high-level abstract question, but like, you know, why did you call that button that thing? And like, at first, like, okay, why is this relevant to the whole company? We're all sat here, but you realise that it's just this kind of like, healthy feedback working in practice, and it doesn't even matter what the feedback was. It's just the fact that developers should expect to hear feedback and learn to take it and learn to present their ideas and sell.
Se on sitä, että voi elää enemmän ja paremmin. Kun ihmiset, järjestelmät ja laitteet pelaavat saumattomasti yhteen. Kun löydämme uusia tapoja tehdä asioita ja homma toimii. Se on sitä, että saamme yhdessä aikaan jotain, joka on paljon enemmän kuin osiensa summa. Siinä on vähemmän pöhinää ja enemmän arvoa. Digiarvoa.
T-minus 30 seconds.
It seems to me that what we have here is an entire generation of young people.
We are here today at the Rise of Putulon in Tampere 2019. That's where societal impact, learning and personal growth come together.
We had a successful launch of Futurelon 2019. Catering is reporting that the beer chill-down procedure is proceeding nominally and the coffee machines are loading.
autonomously is something that many companies announce, but in fact is something that is really difficult to achieve from a company perspective. But I like how it's smartly enforced that. Every team has the capacity to decide what technologies to use and how to solve their problems autonomously, and the leadership team believe on that and give us like freedom. We decide company-wise what are going to be like the objectives for the next half a year, and then teams autonomously decide how they can contribute to those goals. Each team is trusted to do the best. Usually when you start in a company, you have to just move fast and break things. But at some point when the company grows, those early days code can start to be problematic when you need to scale some part of the product. So now we have taken that challenge, and with the help also from the leadership, like we have been like bringing this forward, like this can be a problem in the future. So they also gave us like that kind of freedom to decide like, okay, if you think that this is like fixing things is more important at this moment than just building like new features on top of broken things, like go ahead and fix it. So right now we are building a new product that is gonna take care of fixing the whole things that we felt that has been broken for a while. So that brings us together to the topic of how autonomous the team can be and what kind of decisions you can take. And in Smartly, I'm happy that you can take those decisions and prioritize over what maybe a leadership team could be considering at the moment.
This is the ultimate IT brand film. The visuals are chosen by an AI, which analyzed dozens of other IT brand films. Hello, I'm a deep male voice. Cybercom provides innovative IT solutions on a global scale. That's why this globe shoots out data. Pew, pew. We hope that this beautiful forest makes you associate beautiful Nordic nature with our company, because we too are Nordic and beautiful. Here at Cybercom, we like to keep our employees happy, and that's why all the paid actors in this video will be smiling, no matter where they are or what they're doing. And what does running have to do with IT? Well, not much. But it makes for some great emotional footage. We have offices in all sorts of places, including Helsinki, Copenhagen, Stockholm, and Warsaw. But there's no skyscrapers, so this is Shanghai. We do not have an office in Shanghai. To us, coding is art. But according to AI, it doesn't look cool enough. So this is a painter instead. Our coders get adequate compensation for their work, unlike many artists. AI suggests that we should show a person wearing virtual reality goggles. I think he should be wearing a helmet instead. And these don't exist out of sci-fi movies. Oh dear, still so much data. We have to speed things up now. Taj Mahal, supercar, cute kids, woodworking, what ballpark, what's going on? Well, that didn't work. Hey, maybe we should use the AI to actually do something useful.
Yeah, so how are we gonna separate you because we are doing an audio thing, but maybe your thing is the style guidist and your thing is the academic layout. So maybe that's a good split. So about the academic layout, I love the fact that it was CSS in JavaScript that's done differently than usual CSS. What about?
While I was listening to your talks, I didn't notice anything. So to me, you were excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
continue. Just before that, I'm just going to mention a couple of things. So we have this call for papers online if you want to propose a talk. Next event takes place 2nd of December. It's going to be about performance. It's important and interesting topic because there's so much to learn about it in context of React. And Kiitos. You can, if you want, you can join our Slack as well. You can find the Slack invite at reactfinland.fi and find the Slack over there as well. And next, you can join Zoom. I'm going to send you the link to the Slack and just join the channel. Just a moment. So. Do-do-do.